7 U.S. Marines vanish from a Pacific island in 1943. 82 years later, a fisherman stumbles into the jungle and finds their campfire still smoking. They left on a routine 3-day survey, boots wet, cameras out, rations counted. And that morning is ordinary in every way. The clearing is frozen in time, packs in a perfect circle, helmets on a log, and a fire that smokes but gives no warmth. Driftwood crumbles to cold powder when you touch it. Divers pry up a buried metal hull and uncover evidence that feels engineered. Surgical holes, cables, a device that hints someone deliberately tore them from shore and kept pulling them back. Who has been keeping that cold fire alive for 8 decades, and what in the lagoon still calls men home? The morning air on Taramoa Atoll hung thick and salt-heavy, the kind of tropical stillness that made men sweat before the sun fully cleared the horizon. Staff Sergeant Raymond Holbrook stood at the waterline, his boots already soaked through with warm Pacific water, and watched his 6 Marines load gear into the battered LCVP landing craft. The boat bobbed gently against the eastern shore, its gray paint flaking in the heat. "Mitsui, you gonna take pictures of seagulls all day, or you gonna help Red with those water cans?" Holbrook's voice carried the practiced authority of a man who'd taught 7th grade geography before the war turned teachers into sergeants. Corporal James Mitsui looked up from where he knelt, adjusting the focus on his Argus C3. "Just documenting our departure, Sarge, for posterity." His voice held the careful precision of someone who knew his face made some men question his uniform. He snapped one more frame, Red Davenport's broad grin as he hoisted a jerry can, then slung the camera over his shoulder. "Posterity," Red drawled, his Mississippi accent turning the word into something longer and slower. "That's a fancy way of saying nobody back home's gonna believe we got sent to map beaches on an island that ain't got nothing but sand and dead Japs." He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Easiest duty since we hit these islands, boys. 3 days of swimming and surveying. Hell, I might actually sleep tonight." Private Billy Creech, 18 years old and still carrying the gaunt look of Appalachian poverty under his Marine tan, hefted it. Half their company vanished into smoke and coral. The nickname had stuck, weighted with survivor's guilt and desperate hope in equal measure. Private Luther Washington, 21 years old and Birmingham-born, stacked rifles carefully in the boat's center. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd once picked cotton from dawn to dusk and learned that good work was the only protection a black man had. "Any of y'all actually seen the western beaches?" he asked. Holbrook shook his head. "Seabees say they're untouched. Japs never got around to fortifying that side. Command wants depth measurements for potential harbor development." He consulted the map case at his belt. "We survey the lagoon, catalog any abandoned positions, take our measurements, camp 2 nights, and we're back by Friday evening. Simple reconnaissance." "Nothing's simple out here," Private David Silverstein muttered, but he was smiling. The Brooklyn rabbinical student had found an unexpected talent for fieldcraft and an even more unexpected friendship with the southern sharecropper's son. "But I'll take simple over what we had at Tarawa." The sun broke fully over the horizon, turning the lagoon into hammered gold. Holbrook did a final count: 7 men, 3 days of rations, full canteens, adequate ammunition. The western side of the atoll was secure, cleared weeks ago. This wasn't combat, it was cartography. "Mount up," he called. "Let's get this done and get back before the Navy eats all the good chow." They climbed aboard, the boat settling lower in the water under their weight. The Higgins boat operator, a Navy kid who looked even younger than Billy, started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, then caught with a diesel roar that scattered birds from the nearby palms. As they pulled away from shore, Red started singing something low and off-key, and Mitsui raised his camera to photograph the receding beach. The morning light was perfect, the kind of golden hour that made even a war-torn atoll look like paradise. At 09:45 hours, they rounded the atoll's northern point. A crew of Seabees constructing the airstrip looked up from their work, saw Marines in a boat, and one of them waved. Red was fishing off the stern with a line he'd scrounged. Western Survey Point, 10:30 hours. He had no way of knowing it would be one of the last normal sentences he'd ever write. 5 days later, on the morning of November 8, 1943, Lieutenant Marcus Pendleton led a search party along the same route. The delay had been bureaucratic. Initial reports of the overdue patrol had been filed, acknowledged, and deprioritized. One missing squad among thousands of men scattered across the Pacific warranted concern, but not alarm. Mechanical trouble, navigation error, temporary radio failure, all more likely than disaster on a secured island. But by November 7th, concern had metastasized into something darker. Pendleton's patrol found the LCVP exactly where they'd expected it, pulled up on the western beach, bow secured above the high tide line with regulation knots. The engine looked functional, no damage to the hull. The boat sat there like its crew had simply stepped away for a few minutes and planned to return. "Tracks lead inland," Corporal Davies called out, kneeling in the sand. 7 sets, recent, maybe 3-4 days old. They knew what they were doing, stayed together, maintained interval. The search party followed the footprints into the jungle. 300 yards in, they found the clearing. Pendleton had seen a lot since landing on Guadalcanal 18 months ago. He'd seen men torn apart by artillery, burned by flamethrowers, drowned in surf. He'd seen field hospitals and mass graves and bombed-out villages where nothing moved except flies. But he'd never seen anything like this. 7 packs arranged in a perfect circle around a stone-ringed fire pit. 7 M1 Garands leaning against palm trees, positioned with the kind of care men showed when they expected to return. 7 helmets lined up on a driftwood log like trophies or headstones. 7 canteens, visibly full of water, sitting beside the packs. "Jesus Christ," Davies whispered. Pendleton approached slowly, his Thompson submachine gun raised, scanning the jungle. The clearing felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Too quiet, too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. He knelt beside the nearest pack and opened it. Inside, full rations, untouched, dry socks, cigarettes. A letter addressed to Private Eugene Davenport, Tupelo, Mississippi. Lights in lagoon. Geometric patterns, moving beneath surface. Mitsui photographed but says camera likely won't capture luminescence. O'Brien thinks we should wait until dawn. Might be phosphorescent algae. Red wants to investigate now. Billy's spooked. Washington and Silverstein checking weapons as precaution. Putting it to a vote. The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen trailing off the page. Pendleton read it twice, then closed the log and stood. The sun was directly overhead now, burning through the canopy. Somewhere in the distance, waves broke against coral. Otherwise, silence. "Sir?" Davies had moved to the far edge of the clearing. "You need to see this." Pendleton followed him to where the jungle opened onto a narrow trail leading toward the lagoon. In the sandy soil, clear as photographs, 7 sets of boot prints, walking single file toward the water. They tracked the prints to the beach. The footprints continued across the sand, through the tide line, into the shallow water. At waist depth, they simply stopped. No prints returning. No signs of a struggle in the sand. Just 7 Marines who'd walked into the Pacific and never come back out. "Drowned?" Davies asked, but his voice carried no conviction. Pendleton stared at the calm water. The lagoon stretched before them, clear enough to see the sandy bottom 20 feet out. No bodies floating. No debris. Just endless blue water and the sound of his own heartbeat. "Get divers," he said. "Search the lagoon, and I want every inch of this island combed. 4 square miles. There's nowhere to hide. They're here somewhere." But even as he gave the orders, he knew they wouldn't find the 7 men. Not alive. Maybe not at all. Something had happened on this beach. Something that made 7 combat veterans walk into the ocean in the middle of the night and vanish. Pendleton looked back at the clearing, at the 7 packs still sitting in their perfect circle, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The search begins in earnest at 0700 hours on November 9th, under a sky the color of old pewter. Lieutenant Marcus Pendleton stands on the western beach watching 24 Marines fan out into the jungle interior.
"Sir," Corporal Davies approaches from the campsite, his freckled face pale beneath 3 days of stubble. "You should see this." Pendleton follows him into the jungle, boots crunching on dead palm fronds. The temperature climbs 10 degrees once they're beneath the canopy. Mosquitoes drone in clouds. The path to the campsite is obvious now. 24 Marines have trampled it into a clear trail. But Pendleton can still see the original track. 7 sets of boots, pressed into soft earth, walking in single file. Holbrook in the lead, by the depth and spacing. The prints are unhurried, methodical. Men walking to investigate something, not running from it. The clearing appears exactly as it did yesterday. The stone fire pit sits dead center, its rocks blackened but cold. The 7 packs remain in their perfect circle, each one positioned with the opening facing inward. Pendleton kneels beside the nearest pack, the name Davenport stenciled on the canvas flap, and inventories its contents for the 3rd time. 3 days of sea rations, untouched, spare socks, a writing kit with 2 letters home, unsealed but unmailed, a small leather Bible with a pressed magnolia blossom marking Psalms. Red Davenport, the one from Mississippi who could make the whole platoon laugh with his Hank Williams impressions. 19 years old. "We found something else," Davies says, "in the canopy." He points up. Pendleton follows his finger to a high branch where something catches the filtered morning light. A camera, dangling from its leather strap, wedged in a fork of wood 15 feet above the ground. Mitsui's camera. The Kodak he carried everywhere, documenting everything. "How the hell did that get up there?" Pendleton asks. "That's what we're wondering, sir. No way it was thrown. The straps wound around the branch 3 times, like someone took the time to secure it." Pendleton stares at the camera. Mitsui was 5'6", maybe 140 pounds. Athletic but not a climber. And why would he climb a tree in the middle of investigating strange lights in the lagoon? Unless he was trying to hide the camera. Trying to preserve the film. "Get it down," Pendleton orders. "Carefully. I want that film developed as Shallow, nowhere deeper than 15 feet, and the bottom is featureless white sand. There's nowhere for 7 bodies to hide. Chief Petty Officer Harrison surfaces after his 2nd dive, spitting out his regulator and swimming to shore with strong, efficient strokes. He's 43, one of the Navy's most experienced divers, and when he pulls himself onto the beach, his expression is troubled. "Lieutenant, we've covered maybe 70% of the bottom. Nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no disturbance in the sand except those." He points to where the footprints emerge from the jungle and continue into the water. Pendleton has been staring at those prints since yesterday. 7 pairs of boots, standard USMC issue, pressed clearly into the wet sand at the waterline. They march in single file into the lagoon, each step growing fainter as the water deepens, until they fade entirely in water perhaps waist-deep on the average Marine. And then, nothing. No prints returning to shore. No signs of struggle. No indication the men ever turned around or attempted to come back. "What about currents?" Pendleton asks. "Could bodies have been pulled out to sea?" Harrison shakes his head. "Lagoon's landlocked on 3 sides, sir. The only opening is that narrow channel on the north end, and even that's too shallow for anything bigger than a rowboat at low tide. Current's negligible. If 7 men drowned here, they'd still be here. What if they swam out through the channel? Why would they? And where would they swim to? The next atoll is 80 miles northeast. In November water temperatures, in full combat gear?" Harrison's tone is gentle but firm. "Nobody swims 80 miles, sir." Pendleton knows he's right. He's known since yesterday that whatever happened to the Lucky 7, it wasn't a simple drowning. A shout comes from the jungle. Pendleton turns to see a sergeant running toward him, rifle swinging on its sling. "Sir, We found something, about 200 yards inland, near the old Japanese gun emplacement. The gun is a Type 92 heavy machine gun, 7.7 millimeters, still mounted on its tripod but half buried in sand that someone has deliberately piled over it. The excavation crew has cleared the weapon enough to reveal its condition. Ammunition completely expended, every round fired.
Carved into the metal with a knife point. RH 11-4-43. Raymond Holbrook, November 4th, 1943. One day after the patrol was last heard from. Jesus Christ, Davies whispers. What were they shooting at? Pendleton has no answer. He stares at the lagoon, visible through the trees, its surface mirror calm and undisturbed. Behind him, one of the excavation crew makes a strangled sound. Sir, under the gun. There's something else. They dig carefully, using entrenching tools and bare hands. 6 inches below the weapon, wrapped in an oiled cloth that Pendleton recognizes as a Marine-issue gun rag, is a journal. Holbrook's patrol log. The one they found at the campsite yesterday was standard issue. Olive green cover, 20 pages of regulation entries. This one is personal. A small leather notebook, the kind you'd buy at a 5 and dime before shipping out. Pendleton opens it with trembling fingers. The first entry is dated November 3rd, 2100 hours. The lights appeared at 2015, not flares, not phosphorescence. Mitsui says they move with purpose, geometric patterns, rising and falling beneath the surface like something breathing. O'Brien wants to wait until dawn. I'm overruling him. If this is enemy activity, we need intel now. Taking all 7 into the lagoon to investigate. The second entry, November 3rd, 2347 hours. We made contact. God help us, we made contact. It's not Japanese. It's not American. I don't know what it is, but it came up from below, and Red is dead. I saw his face when the light touched him, and I know he's dead even though he's still walking. We ran. The gun we found. We're going to use the gun. We're going to kill it before it takes the others. The handwriting deteriorates with each line. November 4th, 0130 hours. Fired at it. All the ammunition. It went back down. Think we heard it. Think we... Billy's gone. Billy walked back into the water. We tried to stop him, but he pushed Luther away and just walked. Said it was calling him home. Said it had his mother's voice. November 4th, 0320 hours. 4 of us left. Catches the late afternoon light. Kalani Tiao spots it from his skiff, 300 yards inland from the western beach where he's just hauled up another poacher's net. The third this week. Tangled with triggerfish and juvenile tuna that should never have been taken. He kills the outboard motor and lets the boat drift, squinting at the white column threading up through the jungle canopy. Fire season ended a month ago with the rains. Nobody lives out here on the western side. Nobody has any reason to. The smoke continues its steady rise, unhurried, like someone's brewing afternoon coffee. Kalani secures the skiff to a coral head and wades ashore, his feet finding the familiar cuts and channels without thinking. He's 43 years old and has fished these waters since his grandfather first put him in a boat at age 6. He knows every reef, every current, every place where the bottom drops away into channels that older fishermen still call Teana Otamate, the caves of the dead. His family returned to Taramoa in 1967, after the Americans finally abandoned their weather station and airstrip. Growing up, Kalani had explored every square foot of the atoll, cataloging the rusted Quonset huts, ammunition dumps, and the eerie grid of a runway slowly being devoured by jungle. He'd found dog tags, canteens, even a corroded pistol once. The island held remnants of a war his grandfather remembered only in fragments. Big ships on the horizon, planes overhead, then silence. But fire? That's new. That's wrong. He pushes into the jungle, following the smoke. The undergrowth is thick here, untouched by the paths that crisscross the more accessible eastern shore. Vines catch at his shirt. His boots sink into black humus that smells of rot and growth intertwined. Above, coconut palms and breadfruit trees form a canopy so dense the temperature drops 10 degrees in the shade. The smoke thickens as he moves inland.
He can smell it now. Wood smoke. Clean and almost sweet. Like someone burning driftwood or dried palm fronds. No hint of chemicals. No trash fire stink. After 200 yards of hard walking, the jungle opens abruptly into a clearing. Kalani stops so suddenly he nearly trips over an exposed root. The clearing is perfectly circular, approximately 30 feet across. The ground is
Rest on a fallen log at the clearing's edge, lined up like a memorial. At the very center of the circle is a fire pit, stones arranged in a perfect ring, and from that fire pit, smoke rises. Kalani approaches slowly, his breath shallow. He's seen photographs. Every Tarumoa native of his generation has seen the black and white military archive images displayed at the small community center on the eastern shore. In 1943, 7 American Marines vanished from this island. Their campsite was found exactly like this: packs, rifles, helmets in formation. The mystery became local legend, the kind of story his grandfather told in the evening with hushed respect. Te Tangata Nagaro, the disappeared men. But those photographs were taken 82 years ago. This shouldn't exist. The fire pit is active. Smoke coils up from a neat stack of wood, driftwood by the look of it, gray and weathered, arranged in a careful pyramid. There's no flame visible, just the steady stream of white smoke indicating slow combustion. Kalani crouches 6 feet from the fire pit, his knees protesting. The stones ringing the fire show heat discoloration, blackened on their inner faces. Between them, the wood definitely produces smoke. He can track individual currents as they twist upward. He looks around the clearing. Nothing else disturbs the scene. The packs haven't been touched. He can see spiders have built webs between several of them. The rifles stand frozen in their rust. Vines have begun to climb one helmet. This site has sat undisturbed for decades. Except for the fire. Kalani pulls out his phone, thumbs to the camera, and takes 3 photos. In each one, the smoke shows clearly. He takes a short video, narrating softly. December 14, 2025, Western Interior, Old Marine Site. Fire is burning. His voice sounds strange, too loud in the stillness. He edges closer to the fire pit. The stones radiate no heat. He holds his hand over the smoke and feels nothing. No warmth, no updraft. This makes no sense. Kalani has built hundreds of fires. He's burned everything from coconut husks to fishing boat wreckage. Fire produces heat, always. The smoke rising from this wood should be riding backs away from the fire pit, his eyes locked on the rising column. A single thought surfaces through his shock. Te ahi o te po. The fire of night. His grandfather's phrase for things that shouldn't be. Ghost lights over the reef, sounds from empty houses. The sensation of being watched by something that leaves no footprints. He never believed those stories. The 7 packs surround him. In the direct sunlight he can make out details, stenciled letters on one, USMC. Canvas straps brittle with age, flaps secured with corroded buckles. One pack has partially split, revealing what looks like a canteen inside. Metal, green, ancient. These are the actual packs, the ones from 1943. This is the exact campsite. Kalani's grandfather had been 12 in 1943, living on a different island when the Americans came through. But he'd heard the stories later. 7 Marines who walked into the lagoon and never came back. Their camp found days later like they'd simply evaporated. The military had searched for weeks. Every local who returned after the war knew the story. Some claimed to see lights on the western beach at night, or hear voices speaking English where no one lived. Superstition, Kalani had always assumed. Embellished memories. But this fire is real. Was real. Is real. He circles the clearing, giving the fire pit a wide berth. Behind one pack, nearly hidden in the undergrowth, he spots something rectangular and dark. Kneeling, he brushes away leaves and finds a book, or what remains of one. The cover is leather, swollen and cracked, mottled with mold. He lifts it gently. The binding cracks but holds. Inside, pages covered in handwriting, blue ink faded to gray. Water damage has made most of it illegible, but he can make out fragments. November 3rd, 22:47 hours. Lights in the lagoon. Mitsui photographed. Putting it to a vote. This is the patrol log. The one mentioned in every account of the disappearance. The last entry supposedly cut off mid-sentence as the Marines went to investigate the lights. Kalani turns the fragile pages. Most entries are routine. Navigation notes, supply counts, weather observation.
Signature. No date. Kalani's hands tremble as he sets the log down carefully where he found it. The smoke continues its rise behind him, steady and impossible. He needs to call someone. The Marshall Islands Police, the U.S. military liaison in Majuro, someone who handles, what, unexplained fires at 80-year-old disappearance sites? He pulls out his phone again. 1 bar of signal, barely enough. His finger hovers over the screen. Behind him, wood shifts in the fire pit. Kalani spins. The remaining driftwood has collapsed further, settling into a new configuration. Smoke rises thicker now, almost gray. And for just a moment, less than a second, he sees something in the smoke. A shape, human-sized, standing in the column of white. Then nothing, just smoke. Kalani runs. He crashes through the jungle, branches whipping his face, his breath ragged and loud in his ears. The skiff is where he left it. He throws himself into the boat, yanks the motor to life, and guns it toward the eastern shore. He doesn't look back. The military helicopter descended through clear Pacific sky, rotors beating humid air over Taramoa's western shore. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face to the window, watching the jungle canopy blur beneath them, a carpet of green that had kept its secret for 82 years. She'd reviewed the fisherman's photographs on the flight from Honolulu. The campsite looked identical to the 1943 archive images she'd memorized during her graduate work on World War II disappearances. 7 packs, 7 rifles, the same stone ring, and smoke rising from wood that crumbled to ash when touched. The C-130 had landed first, bringing equipment and a security detail. Sarah's forensics team followed in the Seahawk, circling once before settling onto the old airstrip's cracked concrete. December heat hit her like a wall when the door opened. Lieutenant Commander James Rawlings met her on the tarmac. Naval Intelligence, crisp whites already dark with sweat. "Dr. Chen, welcome to the middle of nowhere." "Commander," she hefted her field case. "The site's been secured? Marines have it cordoned off. Nothing's been disturbed since the initial report." Firm, but his eyes kept drifting to the trees. "I can take you in. It's maybe 400 meters. You've been back since you found it?" "Once. Yesterday, with the Marines who set up the perimeter." He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket, lit one with shaking hands. The fire wasn't smoking anymore, but I could smell it, like someone had just put it out. They entered the jungle in single file. Sarah walked behind Kalani, recording everything with a body-mounted camera. Rawlings followed with 2 armed Marines, their boots loud on the leaf litter. The temperature dropped 10 degrees under the canopy. Bird calls echoed in the cathedral space between massive trunks. Kalani stopped at yellow tape strung between trees. "It's just ahead." The clearing opened before them like a stage set. Sarah's breath caught. 7 weathered canvas packs sat in a perfect circle around a stone fire pit. 7 M1 Garans leaned against the surrounding palms, their wooden stocks gray with age, metal eaten by rust. 7 helmets rested on a fallen log, dented and faded but still bearing traces of marine green. It was exactly as the 1943 photographs showed. Exactly. "Jesus," one of the Marines whispered. Sarah approached slowly, documenting each step. The packs sat equidistant, their positions suggesting deliberate placement. She knelt beside the nearest one, reading the stenciled name through decades of mold and decay. PFC E. Davenport, Red, the Joker from Mississippi. She'd read his sister's letters to the War Department, begging for information year after year until her death in 2019. Sarah stood and moved to the fire pit. The stone ring was intact, each rock still locked in place. Inside, a pile of driftwood logs lay in careful arrangement. She pulled a thermal camera from her pack and scanned the pit. Ambient temperature, 28 degrees Celsius. No heat signature at all. "Commander, look at this." She pointed to the ash beneath the logs. It's stratified, multiple layers. Rawlings crouched beside her. Meaning? Meaning this fire has been lit more than once. Sarah set down the thermal camera and pulled out a small trowel. "I need
Sediment. Carbon dating would give precise dates, but she could estimate from the stratification, decades between each burning. The fire had been lit 7 times over 82 years. "That's impossible," Rawlings said, watching over her shoulder. "Who's been lighting it?" Sarah didn't answer. She'd reached the bottom layer now, the oldest ash, compressed into a hard cake. She worked around its edges with the trowel, feeling for the pit's stone floor. Metal clinked against her tool. "I've got something." She used a brush now, clearing ash with archaeological precision. Metal appeared, green-brown with corrosion. A belt of linked ammunition, Japanese Type 92. She'd seen identical belts in the forensics archives from Pacific campaigns. The belt was wrapped around something. Sarah worked for another 20 minutes, freeing the bundle from 82 years of burial. Finally, she lifted it clear, cradling it in both gloved hands. 7 dog tags on beaded chains, wrapped tight in the ammunition belt. The metal had turned dark green, but the stamped lettering remained sharp. Holbrook, Raymond J. Mitsui, James K. Davenport, Eugene M. She read them all. 7 names she'd memorized from casualty reports. 7 men who'd walked into the lagoon and never returned. "Why would they bury their own tags?" Rawlings asked. Sarah turned the bundle slowly. The ammunition belt bothered her. Japanese. Fully linked but not loaded in any weapon. Just wrapped around the tags like a ceremonial binding. "They didn't," she said quietly. "Someone else did." A shout came from the clearing's edge. The Marine operating the ground-penetrating radar was waving urgently. Sarah carried the tags over, still cradled in her hands like something sacred. "Ma'am, you need to see this." The Marine pointed to his screen. "I've been running a grid pattern like you asked. Most of the lagoon floor is sand, coral rubble, nothing unusual. But here," he tapped the display, "dead center, where the GPS marks those 1943 footprints ending, there's a massive metallic signature, maybe 15, 20 feet long, buried under about..." "Can have a team here by 1800 hours." Rawlings was already making calls. Sarah walked to the water's edge. The lagoon was crystal clear, turquoise shading to deep blue where the reef dropped off. She could see fish moving in lazy schools. Nothing disturbed the surface except gentle swells from the distant ocean beyond the atoll. Somewhere beneath that peaceful water, 7 Marines had found something that killed them. She thought of the ash layers. 7 fires over 82 years. As if someone had returned to this spot again and again, lighting the same fire in the same pit, keeping a vigil that spanned generations. Kalani appeared beside her, staring at the water. "My grandfather said this lagoon was tapu, forbidden. He never fished here, never let his nets drift this direction." He lit another cigarette. "When I was small, I asked him why. He said the water remembered things it shouldn't." "Remembered what?" "The dead who wouldn't leave." Sarah turned to face him. "Do you believe that?" Kalani exhaled smoke, watching it drift across the lagoon. 3 days ago I didn't believe in fires that burn cold for 80 years either. He met her eyes. Now I don't know what to believe. But I know what I saw. That smoke was real, and something in it was watching me. The sun was dropping toward the horizon when the dive team arrived. 4 Navy divers in full gear, equipment cases loaded with underwater lights, cameras, and excavation tools. Their team leader, a chief petty officer named Torres, reviewed the sonar readings while his men prepped their tanks. "Straightforward recovery dive," he told his team. 12 feet, no current, good visibility. We go down, clear the sand, identify the target, photograph everything. He looked at Sarah. "You want us to enter if it's a sub?" "Not on the first dive. Document the exterior, look for identifying marks, check structural integrity. If it's safe to enter, we'll plan a second dive." Torres nodded and turned to his men. "Buddy pairs. Martinez, you're with me. Chen and Kowalski, you've got perimeter. Nobody goes inside anything until we know what we're dealing with. The water is clear as gin. Visibility 50 feet in every direction." Navy diver Chief Petty approaches the anomaly. What emerges from the sand is wrong immediately. A curved metal surface, heavily corroded, covered in 82 years of marine growth. But the shape is unmistakable. A submarine conning tower, smaller than any he's seen in his 20 years with the Navy. He signals Torres. "Found it." They circle the structure slowly, brushing away decades of accumulated sand with careful sweeps of their gloved hands. The submarine, if that's what it is, measures perhaps 40 feet long, stubby and asymmetrical, buried at a 45-degree angle with only the conning tower and forward section visible above the sand line. No identifying numbers mark the hull. The metal itself seems oddly textured, almost organic in places where the corrosion has created Baroque patterns. Torres photographs every angle while Delaney examines the hatch. It's partially open, jammed by rust and sediment into a position that allows perhaps 8 inches of clearance. Salt and time have welded the mechanism solid. On the surface, Sarah watches the live feed and speaks into the waterproof radio system. "Can you see inside?" Delaney positions himself above the hatch gap, angling his powerful dive light into the opening. The beam cuts through murky water trapped inside the hull for 8 decades. Something pale shifts in the current created by his movements. "Negative on clear visual," he reports. "Water's cloudy inside. I'm going to try to widen the..." His hand slips on the corroded metal. The hatch groans, then surrenders to physics and time, swinging fully open with a rush of disturbed sediment that momentarily blinds both divers. When the cloud settles, Delaney shines his light directly into the submarine's interior. Then he jerks backward so violently he nearly collides with Torres. "Jesus Christ," he breathes into the radio. Inside the flooded compartment, illuminated by the bobbing torchlight, 7 skeletons hang suspended in the water like marionettes with cut strings. They're wedged into impossible positions. One draped over what appears to be an equipment console, another pressed against the bulkhead with arms raised as if warding off a blow, a third curled fetal in the corner. The bones are still clothed in the rotted remnants of USMC combat fatigues, the fabric barely holding together, moving gently in the current. Torres's voice is steady, professional. On the surface, Sarah's fingers have stopped drumming. She's leaning so close to the tablet that Kalani, standing beside her on the boat, can see the reflection of the underwater footage in her glasses. "I need detailed photos of the skulls," she says quietly. "All of them, especially the posterior aspect." Delaney maneuvers carefully into the submarine's interior, his light playing across the scene like a surgeon's lamp. The equipment in the center fascinates and disturbs him. It's clearly Japanese in origin, but unlike any submarine hardware he's familiar with. Cables run from the central device to 7 smaller units positioned around the interior, each ending in what looks like a crude helmet or headpiece. 6 of the helmets still rest on skeletal heads. The 7th lies on the deck plates, corroded and crushed. He photographs the first skull close up. At the base, just above where the spine would connect, there's a small, perfectly circular hole, 4 millimeters in diameter, precise as a drill bore.
"What am I looking at?" he asks. Sarah doesn't answer immediately. She's pulling up reference files on her laptop, comparing the whole to known weapons trauma, medical procedures, execution methods. Nothing matches. The whole is too precise, too clean, even accounting for decay. It's not a bullet wound, no radiating fractures, no exit trauma. It's not from any surgical tool she recognizes. "Check the others," she finally says. Delaney works his way through the cramped interior, photographing each skull in turn. Every single one has the identical hole in the identical location. 7 men, 7 holes, each placed with surgical precision at the base of the skull where the brainstem meets the spine. Torres has moved to the equipment, filming the central device and the cables. Something catches her eye. Scratches on the metal surface, deliberate marks gouged deep despite the corrosion. She wipes away sediment with careful fingers. "Chief, there's writing here." Delaney joins her, his light revealing English text carved into the bulkhead with what must have been a knife or some other sharp implement. The letters are crude but legible, written in several different hands, some steady, others increasingly frantic. November 4, 0300. The machine won't turn off. November 4, 0517. The tablet screen where the underwater message fills the frame. Beside her, Kalani speaks for the first time since the dive began. "The fire," he says quietly. "They lit it before they died. They thought it would bring them back." "That's impossible," Sarah says automatically. "They died down there. They never made it back to the surface." "Then who kept lighting it?" Kalani asks. 7 times, 82 years. Sarah has no answer. She watches the live feed as Delaney carefully removes one of the helmet devices from a skull, bagging it for analysis. The skull beneath rocks gently in the current, the small hole at its base perfectly round, perfectly placed. In the submarine's interior, something shifts. Delaney and Torres both freeze, their lights sweeping the compartment. One of the skeletons, the one that had been draped over the console, has changed position. Its arm now points toward the open hatch, the skeletal finger extending as if indicating an exit. "Did you touch that?" Delaney asks. "No." Torres's camera is still recording. The footage shows clearly. Neither diver approached that skeleton. The current isn't strong enough to move bone. They watch for 30 seconds. Nothing else moves. Delaney tells himself it's water pressure, delayed settling, some rational explanation. But his instincts, honed by 2 decades of military service, are screaming at him to get out of the submarine. "We're coming up," he announces. "We've got what we need." They exit carefully, ascending at the proper rate to avoid decompression issues. Behind them, in the flooded submarine 12 feet below, 7 skeletons remain in the positions they've held for 82 years. The equipment between them sits silent, corroded, its power source long dead. But on the central device, beneath the layers of rust and marine growth, a small indicator light flickers once, too brief to register on any camera, too dim to penetrate the murky water. Then, darkness again. On the surface, Sarah is already on her satellite phone to the Pentagon, requesting immediate transport for the recovered evidence. Kalani stands at the boat's stern, looking back toward the western shore where smoke once rose from an impossible fire. The lagoon is fire burned because somewhere, in some state between death and extinction, 7 men kept trying to find their way home. As the dive boat motors back to the eastern shore, Kalani looks down into the clear water. For just a moment, he thinks he sees movement below. 7 shadows walking in formation along the sandy bottom, marching deeper into the lagoon. Then his eyes adjust, and there's nothing but sunlight and sand and the gentle sway of seagrass in the current. Above the water, the December sun begins its descent toward the horizon. Below, in a Japanese submarine that should not exist, 7 skeletons keep their vigil around a machine that answered questions no one should have asked. The intelligence analyst at NSWC Pacific arrives on a red-eye from San Diego, carrying 3 classification-stamped folders and a laptop he won't let out of his sight. His name is David Chow, 31, civilian contractor with a physics PhD and a security clearance that makes Lieutenant Commander Rawlings straighten his spine when they meet in the Pearl Harbor morgue's briefing room. Dr. Sarah Chen has been awake for 38 hours straight. "You found something," she says, not bothering with pleasantries. Chow sets the laptop on the table between them. Behind him, through reinforced glass, 7 examination tables hold 7 skeletons arranged in perfect anatomical position. The bones gleam under fluorescent lights, clinical and white, scrubbed clean of 82 years of seawater and sediment. "Project Tidewalker," Chow says, opening the first folder. "Declassified in 2019, but buried so deep in the archives nobody noticed. Japanese Imperial Navy, late 1943. They were losing the war and getting desperate." Sarah leans forward. The photographs he spreads across the table show technical diagrams covered in Japanese characters and mathematical equations. She recognizes some of the symbols. Wave functions, quantum notations. But the configurations make no sense for 1943 technology. "They were working on consciousness manipulation," Chow continues, "using electromagnetic fields to interfere with neural activity. The theory was that you could disorient enemy troops, make them susceptible to suggestion, maybe even control basic motor functions. That's science fiction," Rawlings says flatly. Of the skull, angling upward into the brainstem. The precision is surgical. "They were connected to something," Sarah breathes. Chow nods. "The equipment recovered from the submarine matches the designs in these files. 7 helmet-like apparatus, connected to a central processing unit powered by..." He pauses. "We don't actually know. The power source is corroded beyond recognition, but our engineers say the capacitors inside shouldn't exist. The energy storage density is impossible for 1940s tech." Rawlings crosses his arms. "So what are you telling us? The Japanese had some kind of mind control machine and used it on our Marines?" "I'm telling you they tried to build one. Whether it worked..." Chow pulls up another file, this one a translation of handwritten notes. "Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Yamada, Naval Intelligence Service, Special Projects Division. He was the lead researcher. According to his colleagues, he refused evacuation when the Allies started island hopping toward Japan. He believed his work could turn the tide of the war." "Did he survive?" Sarah asks. "Unknown. He was declared missing in action, presumed dead, in 1943. Sarah stands abruptly, walks to the glass partition. 7 sets of remains. 7 men who walked into the water and never came back. We need to identify the 8th skeleton." Chow looks confused. "The 8 Marines?" "7 Marines." Sarah turns to face him. "Count the skeletons we recovered. There are 8 sets of remains in that submarine." The room goes very quiet. Rawlings pulls out his phone, makes a call. 2 minutes later, a Navy photographer arrives with the full set of recovery images on a tablet. They crowd around the screen, scrolling through the dive team's documentation. 7 skeletons in USMC gear positioned around the central equipment. And wedged into the corner, partially obscured by equipment and sediment, 1 more skeleton. Smaller frame, different uniform remnants. The skull bears the same 4mm hole. "Yamada," Sarah says softly. "He used himself as the 8th subject." Chow's face goes pale. The design required 8 connections, 7 subjects and 1 operator. But if he included himself in the test group, no operator. Section of the interior mechanisms. "These connection points," he says, tracing his finger along the screen, "they're not just electromagnetic. There are quantum signature markers in the crystalline matrix here and here. When we ran the material analysis, the isotope ratios don't match anything natural." "English specialist," Rawlings says. Webb swallows. "This thing wasn't designed to disrupt consciousness. It was designed to preserve it, to trap it in a quantum superposition state,
existing in multiple temporal configurations simultaneously. Sarah feels the floor shift beneath her. You're saying their consciousness didn't die. I'm saying it couldn't die. Not completely. The machine locked them in the moment of death, experiencing it continuously while also existing in a distributed state across time. Webb pulls up another image. That's why the fire burned for 82 years. It didn't burn continuously. It burned 7 times, once on each anniversary when their quantum state collapsed temporarily into physical reality. That's not possible, Rawlings says, but his voice lacks conviction. Chow is frantically typing on his laptop. Yamada's notes, he called it eternal midnight, a state between life and death. He thought he could weaponize it, make enemy soldiers experience endless dying. But he needed to test the threshold parameters first. The 7 Marines were his test subjects, Sarah says, feeling sick. And he trapped himself with them. Webb touches the keyboard, brings up a power analysis graph. The device should have run out of energy in 1943. But look at these readings from the quantum field decay. It's still active. Barely, but active. How? Rawlings demands. Consciousness might be providing the power, Webb says quietly. 8 minds trapped in superposition, generating quantum fluctuations that feed back into the system. A perpetual loop. Sarah returns to the morgue window, looks at the 8 skeletons laid out in the fluorescent glare. Behind her, she can hear Chow and Rawlings arguing about classified protocols, about what the Pentagon will say, about national security implications. But she's thinking about Raymond Holbrook scratching messages into steel with fingers that shouldn't move. About 7 Marines and 1 desperate scientist trapped. Decades of decay. The authentication systems are degraded. It might accept any biometric authorization. You want to shut it down. I want to let them go, ma'am. Sarah looks at the 8 skeletons. 8 men who have been dying for longer than most people live. She thinks about their families. The aged sister waiting 82 years for answers. The descendants who never knew them. The mothers who died clutching folded flags. Do it, she says. Rawlings objects, citing chain of command and authorization protocols, but Sarah cuts him off. Those men have been suffering for 8 decades. I'm not making them wait for a committee meeting. They transport the helmet apparatus to an isolated testing chamber, the kind used for detonating unexploded ordnance. Webb sets it up carefully, connecting diagnostic equipment while Sarah and the others watch from behind ballistic glass. On Taramoa, 12,000 miles away, Kalani Teao is checking his nets in the pre-dawn darkness. He doesn't know why he came to the western shore today, only that he woke with an inexplicable urge to be on the water. Webb's hands hover over the corroded control interface. The sequence is simple. I input the shutdown code, authenticate with my biometrics, and the quantum field should collapse in a controlled manner. Should? Rawlings asks. The manual is in Japanese and 82 years old. I'm doing my best. Sarah watches Webb's reflection in the glass. 24 years old, trying to end something that began before his grandfather was born. We're ready when you are, specialist. Webb enters the sequence, places his palm on the authentication pad. The device hums. A sound felt more than heard, vibrating at a frequency that makes teeth ache. On Taramoa, the fire pit erupts. Flames shoot 15 feet into the air, visible from Kalani's boat 200 yards offshore. He stands frozen at the stern, watching fire bloom from jungle that shouldn't burn, that hasn't burned in months. In the test chamber, the helmet begins to glow. Not with heat, the thermal sensors read ambient temperature, but with a phosphorescence that has no earthly source. The lights in the observation room flicker. And then, on the shore, the blaze guttered and went out as suddenly as it had flared. In the test chamber,